We
Here we
made
go.
it, you guys.
MSNBC Election Meltdown.
This is it. This
Watch
is
them
the
cry.
night. Settle in.
This is going to be great.
The first polls have just closed in Kentucky and Indiana. We're going to have some results from those states soon.
Being willing to do the work herself, while Republicans and battlegrounds don't see evidence of any of that kind of work. Other work's being done, right? There's a lot of stuff happening on Twitter or X or whatever it is, but not this kind of traditional campaign work of humbly asking people to vote for them. That
often, because that's who this ground game is for.
Well, and the reason we're talking about it is because in a tight election, that stuff matters.
That's it.
I mean, I think if the polls were different, if we were at a different moment in our country's politics, this might not be the first thing you turn to us and we both say.
Yeah.
But a lot of clues that these late deciders really matter, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it's close, but there's other things going on. Here, late deciders matter.
Democrats are encouraged.
They matter.
Abundance of caution. That's okay.
Yes.
Keep counting.
An hour ago, but now the state of Kentucky is closed. There, NBC News projects that Donald Trump has won the presidential election in Kentucky.
Tonight, the last New York Times Siena poll had Trump up 13 points in Florida, which is sort of an outlier and surprised a lot of people.
NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won in the state of Indiana.
We know that a lot of conservatives have moved to Florida. We've seen it in the voter registration data. We know the state is moving to the right, partly because of influx of folks. There is an inefficiency in the Electoral College to winning Florida by 10 or 13 points. I personally think we should have a national popular vote. It shouldn't matter if you move from Saginaw, Michigan down to Orlando, how much your vote counts, but it does matter for our purposes. And so
that is also the question that is laying out there. We were talking about Florida, and so I've always got to text my Florida friends. It's kind of what I do. But the other interesting thing that's happened is that you've seen a lot of Florida voters migrate. Republicans have been winning the voter registration game for a long time in the state of Florida, but independents are winning it harder.
And a lot of those undecided voters who are making game time calls want to vote for a winner. And I really think this is unscientific.
Good point. Yeah.
But the last week has been a very good close for Kamala Harris, not a good close for Donald Trump. He hasn't been able to fill the rallies. He's addled. He has racist comedians opening it. Whatever. It's been a trashy week for Donald Trump. It's been a very strong week for Kamala Harris. And if you're sitting there in the line thinking, I want to vote for the person who has a W at the end of their name after this is all over, that's a good thing for Kamala Harris.
And can I just
add spread across DeKalb County, Fulton County, and Gwinnett County, where precincts were able to extend their hours. They had to extend their hours because there were false bomb threats that were made in those polling locations. So that there is a winner. NBC News projects at poll closing in the state of Florida that Donald Trump has won the state of Florida.
That's a big one.
In the state of Tennessee, NBC projects a winner, projecting Donald Trump to be the winner in Tennessee. In Missouri, NBC projects a winner. Donald Trump projected to win the presidential race in the state of Missouri. In the state of Alabama, NBC News projects the winner of the presidential race is Donald Trump. In the state of Oklahoma, NBC News projects that the winner of the presidential race is Donald Trump. In the state of South Carolina, NBC News now projects that Donald Trump is the winner of the presidential contest in South Carolina. Governor Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor there, has used the state government, has used state agencies, including state law enforcement, to try to tip the balance in those races, sending state police to people's houses because they signed the petition to get the abortion rights amendment on the ballot. Poll closing, NBC News can project that the winner of the presidential contest in Arkansas will be Donald Trump. Stephanie Roll.
The story that we've all been covering, the thing we've been talking about, the thing that 7 anchors are getting at, is really at its core a gender gap on the issue of bodily autonomy. And I think that is not... Those are the things you're getting in your ear, right? The calls you have to make. You're not getting a call on the gender gap.
The news out of Arizona. Arizona's Secretary of State Adrian Fontes announced at a news conference that there were 4 non-credible bomb threats.
Of course.
In some cases, officials have attributed these things to Russian origin. Interestingly, in Arizona, they're saying that some of these threats came from a .ru email address, but that is something somebody could spoof. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is from Russia, but it turns out that's going to be a lot of the background noise of today's election day in multiple states in the United States. Our friend Jen Psaki is here. Jen, good to have you here on set.
Good to be here.
From what you have seen in all the results that we've had come in thus far as we head towards 9 o'clock, what's caught your eye?
I'm just going to give a couple of everybody take a breath.
She's worried.
Warnings here. Okay. One is DeKalb County is not in Georgia because of the extension of the poll hours. That is such a big county for the Democrats. We don't know what's going to happen in Georgia. I would also just reiterate, I mean, maybe you've all have said this, it's like a baby blue state, I'm going to say, and that it has not been blue for a long time.
No,
it is
it's not.
a hard state for the Harris team. Georgia.
You know, I would like to issue an apology to all of those states that we have not mentioned. It's not our fault. It's the founding fathers. They decided on this thing called the Electoral College, which, interestingly, no other country in the world decided to copy. And because of that, in presidential terms, in effect, on nights like this, you have a right to think that it feels like no one cares about your vote. If you're in California or if you're in New York. And when you think about how enormous a force that can be in voter suppression, there may be nothing quite like it.
State of Texas. NBC News projects that there is a winner, that Donald Trump has won in the great state of Texas. NBC News can also project a winner in the presidential race in North Dakota. The winner is Donald Trump. NBC News also projects a winner in the presidential race in South Dakota. The winner is Donald Trump. NBC News also projects a winner in the Wyoming presidential race. The winner is Donald Trump. Project in Mississippi that the winner of the presidential contest is Donald Trump. NBC News can also project in Louisiana that the winner of the presidential contest is Donald Trump.
And for kids watching for the first time election results, they should know that we never had bomb threats before Donald Trump became a presidential candidate.
Joining Ohio, home state of vice presidential running mate to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is projected to be the winner in the state of Ohio. Again, no surprise there, Ohio. You
mentioned, I mean, they're watching the blue wall and they're watching it not anxiously yet, that would be too strong, but eagerly, if you will.
I mean, right, let's just be blunt about this. If, say, and these are not calls, but let's say Trump wins Georgia and North Carolina. Let's say he also wins Nevada and Arizona.
He did.
If Kamala Harris wins Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, she gets 270, she wins the presidency. And so when we are talking about this being a tight race, it isn't just a tight race in each of these individual swing states. It's a tight race, it's a tight race, it's a tight race. Kansas. NBC News can now project that the winner of the presidential race in Kansas is Donald Trump.
Those three. And they have been surprised. The campaign has been surprised by the level of involvement on these college campuses today on Election Day. They weren't expecting such long lines that actually is requiring in some of these locations that they keep them open longer.
In the presidential race in Utah, Donald Trump projected to win the presidential race in Utah. NBC News also projecting a winner in the presidential race in Montana. So Nevada, too early to call. Trump wins.
The final polls were, I think the final Marist poll, right, was +4 nationally. I mean, I think that what we're seeing is what that looks like. And you take a national number and you toss it around and you think, oh, I don't know, that feels fine. I think that you said a few minutes ago, let's be blunt. Let's be blunt. I think when you watched what Donald Trump did in 2020, what Democrats were fantasizing about was a landslide victory, where he wouldn't be able to peer at a red mirage and falsely claim victory. And so some of what was wanted and desired was a sweep that in a 50-50 country where the final best poll had her +4 nationally really didn't, the data suggested that something that would disallow Donald Trump to claim victory before the results were known, that really wasn't on the table. We live in an evenly divided country and it creates anxiety, but it also requires patience.
Contest in Iowa. Donald Trump is projected to have won the presidential contest in the state of Iowa.
This one more time. And there's 7 million people who do not vote in Texas because they know the Electoral College outcome of every presidential election.
That's it.
And so within that 7 million who don't vote, there's a possibility that we will never get to because the Electoral College locks down a voter suppression system that is better than anything anyone's come up with in the modern day.
Yeah, and Rachel, we'll start here on North Carolina. Look, again, 83% of the vote statewide now counted, and Trump with a 3-point advantage here. It's about 130.
Now, as you know, in Nebraska, the Electoral votes are allotted
Nebraska,
by
you need to change
congressional
that.
district, so I need to be specific here. NBC News is projecting that Donald Trump will win overall the state of Nebraska in the presidential contest, but at this point, NBC News is only comfortable attributing 3 of the 5 electoral votes in Nebraska to Donald Trump. Again, they will go congressional district by congressional district. There is still a chance here that although Trump is winning the state, that Harris may get an electoral vote or 2 out of the state. So we will watch 3 of the 5 electoral votes in Nebraska project.
One thing I will just say, I'm not trying to be rosy all the time at all, but this always happens on election nights where the bigger cities where Democrats have the bigger share of the vote come in later. And there are a lot of places, Grand Rapids, Michigan, a bigger chunk of Philly, Dane County and Wisconsin.
Project a winner in the presidential race in Idaho. Republican Donald Trump projected to be the winner of the presidential race in.
Hey, Rachel. Well, the crowd here is still large, is still loud, but a little bit more subdued. And the word that I keep hearing, it must be some new phrase that has entered the lexicon, is the idea that people here are nauseously optimistic. Not just cautiously optimistic, but nauseously optimistic.
Sounds encouraging.
So project a winner in the presidential contest in North Carolina. NBC News projects that the winner in the presidential race in the state of North Carolina is Donald Trump. This is our first projection of a result in any of the 7 big swing states. The first swing state to be projected by NBC News tonight is North Carolina, going to Donald Trump. I understand we also have a change in the character. One, Joy, North Carolina called for Donald Trump.
Yep, and so it was, it's a state that I think Democrats definitely were reaching for. There was a lot of work to try to turn out the college campuses, which were really thick and really packed, and try to turn out the suburbs. And I think there was a lot of hope because of just the insanity, can we say fairly, of the person who's running for governor in that state, and a thought that, defeating him would also carry Harris in. But in the end, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state.
Come on, white women.
It looks like actually maybe there's some ballots
Look at this
or something
creeper.
coming in right now. We see a police car escort with 2 different vans. But I do want to show you, Rachel, just come take a look through the window here, because this is the one angle you can see election workers here in Philadelphia that is not their camera processing the ballots. And they're all in there now going through the process. Election workers doing their great civic duty. In about 9 minutes' time, we expect the information about the.
Which tells us something important about policy, right?
Yeah.
That maybe this was never about policy. Maybe it's about cultural alienation from the pro-democracy coalition. I mean, I don't even know if you can call it the Democratic Party. Vice President Kamala Harris ran alongside Liz Cheney, and a whole bunch of people, large numbers of Latino men, mostly men, but women also felt no magnetic pull toward that coalition. And I think there's a lot to learn. I just read some comments Chuck Todd made that are similar to comments you made and that Ari's made. I mean, there is a story about realignment. And of course, the ultimate outcome is not known. But what we're learning about how people voted, they did not vote in along sort of even traditional party lines. I mean, your point.
And there was nothing else for the Harris campaign to offer or do. They delivered a very strong economy, and they put a plan forth for one going forward. And what Donald Trump has offered is only going to worsen the economy.
Yeah. And also
NBC News is able to make a projection in a battleground state.
It's a big one.
NBC News now projects that in the battleground state of Georgia in the presidential race, Donald Trump has prevailed in the presidential race in Georgia. So again, of our swing states, we've got 2 called thus far in Georgia and in North Carolina per NBC News. That puts the electoral map at Donald Trump with 246 electoral votes, and Kamala Harris at 189 electoral votes. Again, both candidates aiming at 270. Of the 7 of the 7 states that we consider to be battleground states, 2, North Carolina and Georgia, have been called by NBC News as of this hour. Both of them called for Donald Trump.
Do that.
then she now absolutely must pull out a win in Pennsylvania, because if there's no surprises outside the battleground, then Georgia plus North Carolina plus Pennsylvania would get Donald Trump to 270 electoral votes and the presidency. And look at Pennsylvania. We are closing in on 90%.
Keep watching. They're about to fall apart.
Here. Donald Trump is leading by 100.
Project at this hour, and this is a big one, that the Republican Party will control the United States Senate. Now, what tipped this over is that NBC News is also projecting a couple of Senate races since we last checked in on Senate.
So thank you. We believe in you. May God bless you. May God keep you.
Go home.
And go HU and go Harris.
And go home.
Thank you all.
Make those remarks. At Howard, you can see how it could be different, right? You can see how they could expect that to be the candidate. I think they planned for everything in terms of, it's close, or Harris is ahead, but Trump declares victory. I mean, all these things that everybody gamed out. Now, while we're just waiting for the blue wall states to come in and watching the math, sending people home is also like asking people to conserve their emotional energy, I think.
And it's not possible. I mean, I think there's no other way to describe how people are feeling leaving that venue and people on the campaign than deflated in this moment. Yes, all of the other states have not been called. But what they went to that venue tonight hoping to see and witness was a historic election of Kamala Harris to the presidency.
It was historic.
It was the end of the Trump era as they knew it. And so we don't know the outcome yet, but that is not what they are receiving. And they are being told to go home and wait till tomorrow.
And I think it's important to say that, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. This really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift, she had the Swifties, she had the Beehive. You could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true. And I think
I'm watching Pennsylvania because now we've inched over 90% of the vote in, and Trump's margin now has moved over 200,000 votes in Pennsylvania. That's a 3.5 almost point advantage for Trump.
Over.
What just happened in
Vice President Harris's coalition, this broad coalition she built that includes the Liz Cheneys of the world and the Adam Kinzinger.
She got killed in her election.
Her allies are not in power. They're mostly, members who are now turfed out.
Yeah.
So the actual existing House, the current House majority, is very Trumpy. It's very far right wing.
Led by Mike Johnson, who led the coup.
And so even if
Donald Trump
would you're going to hear when Donald Trump wins the election, and Fox calls it right here. MSNBC hadn't called it, but Fox does.
Just a few miles from his Mar-a-Lago estate, the place that he has all but camped out and over the last 4 years, ever since that January attack, and not attending the inauguration of Joe Biden, moving to Florida in isolation, rising back up to prove his prominence in the Republican Party by helping get MAGA allies of his elected in the 2022 midterms. And Donald Trump here today about to take the stage at a moment in which he and his team feel like they have politically proved from these early results that he is in a good position here. Guys.
Vaughn, I don't know if you can hear me. I know there's big cheers going up from the crowd there. You had mentioned at the
Us, of course. But in Western Europe and in the UK and in the Middle East, people are waking up to this.
Oh, and they are.
And I'm thinking of the people who are going to wake up to Donald Trump's remarks tonight are people like Emmanuel Macron and Vladimir Zelensky and
who cares what they think?
People of Poland and people in Gaza and people in Tel Aviv and
I've already gotten a text from Ghana and South Africa.
And I've gotten people from Western Europe who are extraordinarily alarmed and terrified about.
They should be.
As a friend of a friend
Daddy's
said,
home.
maps being redrawn.
Steve Kornacki, who is looking at ongoing returns in Pennsylvania. Steve, are we at 94% in Pennsylvania? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, we are. He's 94%.
Fox called it at
190,000 votes. That works out to about a 3 percentage point lead. It is a very significant hill for Kamala Harris to climb here. Just in terms of what's left, the picture is really kind of condensing and clarifying.
A projection to make in the presidential contest in the swing state of Pennsylvania. NBC News now projects that presidential contest has been won by Donald Trump. Now, I believe
this is when it gets really good.
That we are, Harris, at 194 electoral votes. So, to be clear here, this is the third of the 7 major swing states that have been called. But Georgia and North Carolina and Pennsylvania, as those 3 states, presents an almost unless there's it presents an insurmountable future.
It's over
here for Kamala Harris and for the Democratic ticket. In terms of what's
Steve is going through the numbers. We have this very funky and terrible system called the Electoral College, which decides elections in a way that's totally different than every other election in the United States is decided and the way that anything's decided anywhere else in the world. We should scrap it. From the perspective of basic democratic legitimacy, which is something I'm pretty concerned about, something we talk about a lot on this network, it looks possible that Donald Trump might emerge with a popular vote majority when all the votes.
We won't know for a long time.
We won't know for a long time, but this is not outside the realm of possibility. The Electoral College looks strongly in his favor. And if that is the case, if he has won the election, then he has won the election.
2016, there are no surprises, right? In 2016, many people in this country said, I'm sick of the system. I want something different. Let's see what this gives us. When you talk about what happened in 2020, this whole country, this whole world saw it. People know exactly who they're getting, and they chose this. So as we go into this next phase, I'm sure for the next month, it's going to be an autopsy of Kamala Harris's campaign and what she did or didn't do. I don't actually think this is about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I think this is about the American people.
Well, he has my economic.
I'm not defending it, but the other things that seem to matter to a lot of people, right, were the economy, immigration, and again, I'm not saying it's my view, and wokeism. And many people felt like their voice wasn't getting heard, right? So immigration is no longer an issue just at the border. And obviously, nobody is eating dogs and cats in Springfield. However, there are many, many people in communities around the country that do feel like their cities and towns are strapped. Their resources are at capacity.
It's interesting that most of the threat that he made was directed squarely at Latinos, at people who the right fears
he made no threat.
outproduce them in terms of children. But that is where he did the best.
That's
where
illegal.
he gained the most among the people who voted, despite having directly insulted them. And he held steady, it seems, with white American women, despite having really insulted them in J.D. Vance. So,
in the East, and Donald Trump is poised to clinch the presidency right now.
The fact that the Trump theory of the case on rural voters really was true. I freaked out a bunch of Dems on Sunday on your show when I said, look at the early vote numbers. The enthusiasm for Trump in rural is real. And that's exactly what you saw. Kornacki was just going over it. He's just doing better than he'd ever done before and just running up these things. And the other thing was the Latino number. It's just, you cannot look at those exit polls and not think that is amazing. Going forward, the Democrats have a real rural problem, and they have real communication challenges to a whole bunch of groups, including young voters and Latinos, that we thought we had a better message to. And
I just think the Democrats right now have to just reckon with the fact that there's a fundamental brand problem with the party as far as not reaching huge swaths of the country. Jim listed a couple of them with rural and Hispanics. But if you look at the exit polls, Trump gained with every demographic group except college-educated women. Everyone. Black men, Hispanic men and Hispanic women, non-college women. So it wasn't really even a race and gender thing in particular.
Really?
It was widespread. And there's a brand issue to your
abortion rights.
The only bright spot in this entire night was that white college-educated women were not having it.
Cat
That
ladies.
said, white, non-college educated
single
women
ones.
were all in. And I think that, look, we're in a completely different media universe than we were in 2012 or 2010. And I think that's a really important point. We don't know where people are getting their news. And remember,
Yeah, we
Donald
do.
Trump in that speech said it was a huge win for democracy.
Not from you.
So his people also think that he's protecting democracy, which in itself is a huge communication problem here, right?
There are platforms that many people have never even heard of that are massive communicators to voters, including Telegram, including...
I mean, on the stage tonight, during the acceptance speech, they shouted out the Nelk Boys, Theo Von, Joe Rogan. There was one other one. I'm sure folks have heard about Joe Rogan, but a couple of those other ones that Trump, Aiden Ross, that Trump did interviews with, niche outlets, but have huge audiences. And a lot of the people, not everybody, but a lot of the people that are consuming those kinds of news environments aren't. It's not like, to your point, how it's not 2012, 10. It's not like they're then watching the nightly news.
Right.
You know,
Or
like they're
reading
not
the
watching Lester at
Times.
night. No offense to Lester, right? You know what I mean? Like they're in their own bubble, and that's like the majority of
Nobody
the news that they're
believes the media.
consuming. And it is going to be incumbent on Democrats not. And it's kind of funny that the Nelk Boys got mentioned in the acceptance speech tonight, I guess. But you also have to take this seriously and figure out how to talk to those people and how to have a message for those young men, because the Democrats do have a message for the young men, but a lot of times they weren't really trying to offer one.
I want to...
Right? So why do you like Trump? Because he's just like me.
Here's
and
what,
so I think for a lot of, I think this is a culminating moment from that period to now, for at least for me, that those underlying threads have still never been fully understood by the political class, by the media class. And meanwhile, middle Americans go, y'all don't even see me, do you?
Here's, and I'm going to point this question back to you, Michael Steele, to be our translator, because you referenced transgender rights in this ad that the Trump campaign put tens of millions of dollars behind. This is not an issue that to me, this is just to put my cards on the table here, very much a morality issue where young people are born one gender and are another gender, and they have made it into a
liberalism
issue,
is a mental disorder,
cruelty issue, but they've successfully brought people to their side by suggesting, which is ludicrous, that people are going to be sent to school and their teachers are going to change their gender and send them home. That's not factual.
Yeah, tampons in the bathroom with
it's cruel,
the
it's
VP.
harsh. And he has not, at the same time, put forward any economic plan aside from tariffs that will raise costs.
Doesn't have to.
Well, so I guess what I'm asking you is,
I mean, because absent anything else, right? And absent anything else, everyone's going to believe that's exactly what happened.
But isn't this a disinformation
they believe that's what's going to happen.
Isn't this a disinformation problem?
But you got to go in there and combat the disinformation.
Thank you.
That's what I'm saying.
There you go.
I'm not saying that the Democrats have to throw trans kids under the bus.
There you
but
go.
did any Democrat go into a conservative space and say, you're saying that Kamala Harris is going to do, or Donald Trump's saying that Jimmy's going to go into school and come out Jenny. Like, that's not true. Here's what we want to do. Like, here's how we do, here are the protections we want in place. Here are the protections for the girls' sports we want in place. Like, we want to respect everybody. Did anybody actually try to do that? I don't think so.
And that would be a criticism I might have about the campaign, is that they were very cautious.
So what Tim just said. So their theory of the case was democracy and abortion. And Donald Trump's theory of the case was everything else.
Yep.
And
eggs.
No one bothered to pay attention to what his theory of the case was. And so when you couple that, and I was just looking at some of the responses from, some of my friends, who've kind of been watching this and are aligned with Trump. Their view was, you guys completely missed what the country was saying. And the country was saying, yeah, you know what? We're not about forgiving student debt because a lot of hardworking people out there spent a lot of money, and you got to pay your bills. I mean, and so you've got to be able to have an answer for that mindset that believes that if you go and incur a debt, right, I don't have to pay for it. Because that's what it boils down to. You incurred $100,000. Nobody told you to go to Harvard. My kid went to community college, paid his bills. So now you're asking me and him to pay yours? So that's part of the culture piece.
He's starting to sound like a Republican
maybe
again.
we will get Texas. But one of the things that has struck me is this assumption that demographic groups are monolithic, right?
That's
and this is one of the things that I think you look at Texas, every Latino is not the same. I'm saying the obvious here. Just like every black voter is not the same. Just like every woman is not the same. But I do think we're seeing some of that in Texas. It's gone farther away.
Yeah, but I think we also have to talk about, and it pains me to say this, but like, this is similar to 2016. The similarity here is a woman at the top of the ticket. And as a second wave feminist who wants nothing more than equality, it pains me to say this, but we're seeing a lot of
identity
the same
politics,
and we have a woman on top of the ticket. And I just think that does not exist in a vacuum.
I think it's an important thing to talk about. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, particularly considering that women didn't vote for her again for the third time.
Television desk, NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president. And for so many of you watching right now, that news is, to say the least,
wonderful.
A lot to digest. I understand that personally. After he lost 4 years ago, he refused to accept the outcome and incited a violent insurrection on our nation's capital. He's campaigned while facing criminal indictments related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 results, and he's run as a convicted felon. During this campaign, he has also promised to essentially be an authoritarian leader, to use power like no American president ever has before, and wield that power to go after his political enemies. This is a man who's also bragged about overturning Roe v. Wade and stripping away women's bodily autonomy. He's promised to conduct mass deportations to crack down on the rights of millions of Americans. Donald Trump is an anti-democratic force, but he's just been elected democratically in our country.
The Democrats didn't even have a primary.
Here's what might
they didn't
be
let their
the
voters
hardest part
vote
to hear, but we have to talk about and we have to say, and it is a hard part to digest for all of us. But we have to be honest about what we saw in this election. Donald Trump was elected by expanding his support over a number of key groups that we've been digging into this night, all night tonight, as we anticipated where this was headed, and I know we're going to dig into it throughout the course of the day today. And there will be a lot of time spent on how and why he won and what this will mean for the country over the next 4 years and beyond. But in this moment, it's also important to remember that our democracy is not built around one person or one job. And I have every confidence that pro-democracy forces in this country will continue to stand up and make their voices heard. That's what we saw after 2016.
Hopefully it's not the ones that won't let their people vote.
Some of those voices will be governors. Some of them will be elected officials. Some will be institutions and organizations standing up for rights and standing up for women's bodily autonomy and standing up for our climate. Some will be citizens. And many of you sitting at home right now digesting this news right now, some of them will be you. I wish I had better news for my daughter later this morning. I know Tim Miller and I were talking about this earlier, when she and so many others wake up to this news. I wish I could have called her and told her that the first woman president had just been elected. I wish that. I won't be able to do that. But what I can do, what I can tell my daughter, and what I will tell my daughter, is that our roles as American citizens have never been more important than they are right now. I can tell her that there are still lots of good forces out there, forces for good in this country, and that they are going to be
they're called Republicans.
These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before.